And the Trump administration does not change the climate narrative, we are not going to win this battle. Because you can't argue, well, we're going to do this because we can't do that because it costs too much money. And you have other people screaming, climate emergency, climate emergency. You've got to take it on, and they won't do that.
We're here in the green zone at the UN COP25 in Madrid, and we are with the #1 most cited climate skeptic in the world, according to Nature magazine, Marc Morano. Marc, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Alex. Happy to be here today.
So tell us a little bit about what you've seen at this conference. I mean, are they saving the world? I saw your great video where they were eating all the cheeseburgers. What's going on here?
Well, one of the things we're seeing here is the lead up to this is this whole idea of a climate emergency. You know, it's actually like the word of the year now. That and school climate strike are the two leading words of the year by dictionaries. And it turns out this just didn't happen by Greenpeace activists. This was a decision by the United Nations to start emphasizing extreme scenarios in all of their models and projections, reports, and that is what created the climate emergency. So the UN is behind that. So they're trying to use this summit, the climate emergency, to sort of foist the UN Paris Agreement on steroids on us again. So what we found here at this summit, I still think this year is much less energy than previous years. It's, they started in Brazil, the Brazilian Trump, Bolsonaro said, hell no. Then they get forced to Chile, and Chile's like, hey, we want to do this because we'll showcase our, UN-style green policies. Well, that went really well as those policies caused rioting and no one liked the cost of energy going up, so they were booted out of there, came to Spain, and I think there's more. They said this is one of the record number of journalists in attendance, which wouldn't surprise me. It's centrally located in Europe, and it's easy to get to, so a lot of people want to come here just to enjoy the cheeseburgers, if nothing else. So what the UN's doing right now is it's a placeholder conference, waiting, I think, for the next United States elections next year, and I think that's one of the biggest things that they're going to find out. Who's the next president? Because if it's Donald Trump, they can talk all they want about the U.S. still being in or we're going to go forward, but that is a huge storm, and that's going to delay really what they want to do for another 4 years.
So realistically, I was talking to the State Department people here, and they said, oh, we're still planning to get out. We'll be out, the day after the election, and they put out a statement saying that. But then at the same time, they got a team of 50 people here negotiating. We're representing U.S. interests. Realistically, what is the risk to America that we're going to continue to be ensnared in this UN process?
Well, good question. First of all, there's that, I call it the State Department dichotomy, just so viewers understand. You have your career bureaucrats, many of them appointed by Obama, loyal to people like John Kerry, and then you have the Trump team, which unfortunately is not here. Now, last year, I got to go into the belly of the beast and the State Department delegation, and there was like two teams, and it was like oil and water. They didn't mix. There was the Trump team that was representing the appointees of the State Department by Trump, and then the career bureaucrats. And they did an event last year, which the UN allowed a formal protest. So I think what's happening now is the State Department bureaucrats who are here, the career, they're banking on President Trump losing or hoping he does. So technically we are out right after the next election, but their hope is the election won't go that way. So if their reality is achieved, we'll only be out of the UN Paris Agreement from like early November until late January when the next Democratic president. So that's what they're hoping for. Beyond that, there is a tendency, there's a whole contingent in even the Trump administration, the people that Will Happer talked about that are afraid of challenging climate, who want to keep their at least foot in the game and a seat at the table, in the words of Rex Tillerson. And that is very dangerous because I was, back when the Bush was president, he was essentially sending a team here saying we're not going to sign on any UN agreement, but yet the teams would be in there every day negotiating, arguing. They were rubber stamping this UN science, funding the UN science. They weren't challenging an ounce of it. We want to get away from that. Hopefully Donald Trump represents it, but Trump, it's a little iffy. He's great on policy, and he's personally great challenging the science, but his administration has left a lot to be desired, and as Will Happer found out, there was no support for anyone to change the narrative. And the Trump administration does not change the climate narrative, we are not going to win this battle. Because you can't argue, well, we're going to do this because we can't do that because it costs too much money. And have other people screaming, climate emergency, climate emergency. You've got to take it on, and they won't do that. So I think ultimately here, the State Department is hopeful, and it's probably 50-50 whether Trump gets reelected, so we'll see.
Okay, so obviously we have an emergency. People in America are about to get hit if this doesn't go well with climate taxes, all sorts of redistribution. What does an average person out there who maybe doesn't have the platform that you have, what do they do? Go to Climate Depot, get some accurate information. What do they do then to help change the narrative on climate?
Well, the biggest thing, well, first of all, the UN chief just came out yesterday and called for more carbon taxes. And remember, the UN chief is the former president of Socialist International. People need to realize who these people are. And there's other top UN leaders who are all just out and out socialists. So what people need to do is, it's got to come down to politicians. Right now, you have a coalition of Republicans from Mitt Romney, Lindsey Graham, Senator Murkowski, a few House members, and they are basically the free market solution to climate change. They acknowledge that they want to acknowledge that there's a problem that needs to be solved, but they think the Green New Deal goes too far. It's a Green New Deal light approach. So what that does, though, there's so many different things there. What people can do is they need to pressure their congressman, their senator, to stand up and be willing to speak out against this narrative and declare at the very least there's no climate emergency, there's no climate crisis, but beyond that there's no way carbon dioxide is causing any of this stuff. But let's just start with that. And that's almost impossible, but you got to get politicians, elected leaders comfortable at town halls to express skepticism. You've got to push back in the media, and this is at the local level all the way down to letters. The editors are being banned if you allow a skeptical. People have to fight back on every level. And I would also argue anyone who goes to a Trump rally needs to get him, he's the only one in the administration willing to take on the science. And I say that not tongue-in-cheek, not metaphorically. He is literally the only one, and Will Happer is gone, and Will Happer couldn't really do it publicly anyway when he was there, willing to take on the science. So we've got to get Trump to understand the importance of this. You know, EPA chief who hired me, Andrew Wheeler, he's doing fantastic across the board, regulations, fighting everything, will not challenge an ounce of the science. NASA's head reversed himself before he became at NASA, brought Bill Nye to the State of the Union, and now is a believer in global warming. Then you have Rick Perry, who was supporting the UN Paris Agreement, even though he was a former skeptic and when he was governor of Texas. So it's the surrounding of Trump, of who's around him, that's the problem in terms of that narrative. Again, not a bad cabinet in terms of policy. They're fantastic, actually. They're the best cabinet we've ever had, including Andrew Wheeler and not so much Rick Perry. I think he just was a placeholder at Energy. But I think where we go from here is you've got to get Donald Trump to realize the importance. Without Donald Trump, without a federal challenge to the United Nations, which we've never had, without a government ever challenging the United Nations, it's never happened, a government report, we are stuck with the United Nations being the sole authority on this, other than a disparate scientists all over, bloggers, websites, and alternative reports, and other people making collections. That's not enough. We need something official.
So one last question, Mark. I want to ask, people in America, why should they care about this? I hear people here talking about population control. I hear them talking about global carbon taxes, loss and damage, that we need to take American money and give it to third world dictators. What happens if we lose, if the skeptics lose, and what could happen if the skeptics push back successfully? Well,
it's just very simple. In our movie, Climate Hustle 2, which is coming out in April 2020, we interviewed former Czech President Václav Klaus. I interviewed MIT scientist Richard Lindzen. He said actually something interesting. The environmental left, embodied by the climate movement, was energized by the fall of the Soviet Union. This is one of the key things we need to understand. Why would that be? He who controls carbon controls life. It's a bureaucrat's dream to control carbon dioxide. They are coming after every aspect of our life. And that's why the UN chairman is a former Socialist International leader. They want every aspect, from your appliances to what you eat, to the cars you drive, to transportation, to your home thermostat, to how many kids you can have, to what the kids' education's going to be, to your government, to your energy choices, to your economic growth. They're talking about what is the Green New Deal, except what I've heard for years here is arguing for degrowth and planned recessions. The Green New Deal is arguably just a giant planned recession. That's what we should be calling it. So if they are allowed to succeed, and I say allowed, it's one thing if you fight a battle and lose, you can lose with honor. We're not even really fighting it. And what I mean by, outsiders are, but the US government and politicians aren't. It is a catastrophe what's happening. The House of Representatives is down to one Republican-controlled committee, not controlled, but the minority ranking controlled. The House Natural Resources has the strongest skeptics. Other committees have just gone over to the dark side, if you will, don't want to fight back. The committee in the Senate, the Environment Public Works Committee, led by Senator James Inhofe, led by Senator Vitter of Louisiana, who would have regularly science conferences, bring in climate scientists to debunk the United Nations, is now headed by Barrasso from Wyoming, of all places, and he will do nary a hearing or a comment on climate science. They don't want to touch it. We'll talk about energy policy and the economic. So until we push back, that's what, everything is at stake here. The American dream, everything out. They are using the climate scare to achieve what they've been trying to achieve for all these decades, pretty much since the 60s, and that is centralized planning and just knocking America down and essentially redistributing our wealth. And they will succeed if we get another 4-8 years. Remember, President Obama is now called by the Washington Post a conservative. I normally disagree with the Post, but if you look at Obama's presidency and Obama now, with what the current academic, he is a conservative by that standard, so I can't really argue with that. This is a whole new game we're dealing with here, and it is going to be the most rapid reversal of any climate energy policy you'll ever see if Donald Trump loses. So that's what's at stake.
Excellent. Mark, thank you so much. Climate Depot is where you'll find all the latest information on the global warming battle. Mark, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.